Hello, good evening. It's time for some 2D animation fun. I'm going to be talking today about animating quadrupeds a little bit and showing you a work that's actually been finished. Or it's not completely finished, but it's a work that's mostly finished and sort of going through the steps of how it was created and some of the things that I dealt with when I was creating this project, which is a dog that was first walking in place and then ends up walking across a room or a scene. And so I'm going to start by showing what I was working on and what it looks like, and then I'm going to break it down and show you all the ways that I set it up and some of the things that can be issues when you're animating a quadruped walk, when you're animating a dog, in this case. Animating quadrupeds is a little bit different than animating bipeds, which are humans, because you've got 4 legs instead of 2. It seems obvious, but there are things that go with that are specific. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to get into it too much. If you want to know more about this sort of thing, I suggest you check out CG Spectrum, where you can learn to do quadruped walks in 2D or in CG in 3D from one of the mentors that work here at CG Spectrum at the school. But I'm going to just kind of go through the process and talk about it. And as always, I'm here to answer questions and see and talk about anything that you'd like to discuss. I just chose this randomly so you can we can talk about other things, and I can show you other things if they're available. But I thought this would make a nice topic, something interesting to talk about today, because it is such a complex situation with animated quadrupeds. So first, I'm just going to pop this on so you can see it in progress. Let's see what it looks like while I continue to kind of talk about what happens with quadruped walks. I have been doing quadrupeds as an animator now for over 20 something years. I lost count actually, and I did quadrupeds as a 2D person, and then I've also done them as a 3D animator in character animation and in creature effects, which is basically putting a animation over live action backgrounds. And they all have their specific challenges. In creature effects, which I actually really enjoyed, well, I enjoyed all of them, but in creature effects, you're talking about matching footage that already exists. You're matching reference footage that already exists. For example, in Life of Pi, one of the more famous films I worked on, the first thing that we did was we matched 1 for 1 a CG animated tiger to a live action background plate, as they call it, and just tried to capture the essence of that. And then after that, we went and made changes to the animation in progress to make it look more animated, make it look more, to give it more character. The director of that film, Lee, he wanted a very specific look, and he had the money to go in and actually animate things that he wanted the character to do. This character of the tiger, his name was Richard Parker. He wanted him to do very specific things, and so he would say, okay, now that you've captured the reference, now let's make it look like a tiger still, but have it do this instead. That's a little different than you find with character animation, which is what you have sitting on the screen right now, is a little more stylized, a little more 2D is a little more illustrative, and it has to look like animation first and foremost, and then whether or not it looks exactly like a live action realistic dog, that's secondary. That's a choice that you can make, but you don't necessarily want to capture the absolute realism of it. And rotoscoping might end up making it look less realistic than if you were to do a stylized walk, kind of like the one I got on the screen. So that's the scene in question, is what's showing on my screen right now. And that's what I'm going to be going through the process of and talking about a little bit today, barring any other comments or interesting conversations. So I've already got Hadron Skull, nice to see you. What did you actually mean when you said coming up with your own language for your style? Yeah, so talking about style, this is a question that comes up with students. It certainly came up with me when I was getting started. How do I get my own style? How do I apply a style such as the Disney look or a manga anime style? How does that happen? Well, and my response was is that you actually have your own style even as we speak. Anybody who's ever picked up a pencil or tried to build something in a computer animation universe, you're coming at it with your own way of looking at the world. So you've looked at games, movies, television shows, things that you've been exposed to, and you've determined which things you like. I like this, I don't really care about that too much. And based on those things, you have kind of formed a style that you like, that you want to emulate. And so then you try and copy that style and you try to make things that look like that. But you don't like everything that's manga or anime. You don't like everything. You don't like everything Disney. You don't like everything in a video game. You like one specific element of it. So you copy that element. And then the fusion or synthesis, that's a big 50-cent word, but what it means is the joining together of all these different styles that you handpicked and curated yourself that you like now get fused into one individual vision that is uniquely yours. And so it's a little bit of Adventure Time. I always fall back on that one because I think it's an interesting show and it was kind of a trailblazer. It's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of, I think you were talking about Boondocks. What if Boondocks met Spawn, mixed it in with Castlevania, mixed in with, whatever. What if all those things were kind of blended together? Then that becomes something like your style. And so you have a style, even if you haven't cultivated it. The trick to being, in my opinion, a really good artist is that you actually have taken a hold of that and you're now doing it specifically. So in my case, I've talked about this before. I'm not going to pull it up today. It's kind of off topic, but I've talked about, I liked Wally Wood. I liked Peter Pan when he was a little darker. And then the Don Bluth style, Space Ace, Dragon's Lair, Disney style by Milk Call, the real hard-edged, lots of corner stuff. Ralph Bakshi, who was very loose and free, but kind of had a specific sort of 60s cartoon aspect to it. I took all those things and I fused them together, and that became my style. In some ways, maybe you look at my style and go, oh, well, that's a ripoff of this or that or the other thing. That's a direct copy of that. Well, but I'm doing it from my brain, so I'm not copying it exactly. I'm doing it my way, even though I'm copying somebody else's stuff. And the more and more you do that, the more and more you begin to kind of hone a style that's unique, that is your own. And so that style becomes a language. It's your language. It's as if you made up your own language and you're speaking in that language to a friend. And if they know what the language is, they understand what you're saying. So people who look at my stuff, they go, oh, I see the influence of Wally Wood or Don Bluth or Milk Call. It's a language that was created that's based on a specific style. And that style can be thought of as a language. So, and I can show an example of that in a drawing real quick. But first, that is an example of the dog block. So that's what I'm going to be playing around with today. So I'm going to stop that now and pop open a scene in progress, Toon Boom. And then once I'm in there, I can draw, and you can see what I'm talking about when I talk about a specific style. So let's just clean this up and then see if I've got a pencil that I can draw with on a layer that's available and not locked. There we go. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to draw in the Don Bluth style, I would draw, the easiest thing I think is to show how he draws arms, male arms. So Space Ace, he's got an arm that goes like this, and then the triceps, the back of the arm, they go like this. It's two curves against curves. It's not, most people would probably draw a bicep and they draw bicep and then they do something to indicate the triceps. And, there's a tricep muscle and there's a bicep muscle. And then the forearm in Don Bluth land, you could do it with two curves that are actually facing each other this way. So it's this curve and this curve facing each other this way. Or sometimes he will cheat it, he'll go like that, and he'll just make it at a broad angle, but we'll stick with this one for now. Whereas with a real forearm, you'd probably have a curve, and then you'd probably have more of a straighter bone as the elbow comes down and joins. You know, there's a lot more anatomy, and then the skin's going to lay on top of that depending on how well developed your arm is. And so this one is, you know, how you might depict a real arm. And this inserts between the two, and you got the top of the forearm and the bone, and then the bottom of the forearm. So all that stuff connects. Well, Don Bluth, he just simplifies it like this, and his characters will look like that. And then another thing he would do is his characters, if you look at any characters that close fist, he just goes like that. And sometimes they'll put a line there that indicates, I'll do a better job of that, but so he'll have these hands that are real blocky and real choppy. There's a little room here, and then he'll just put a line like that in there, and that's a knuckle line. That indicates that there's a line there for the knuckle, and then he'll just straighten off this, where somebody might put a contour around a cuff that goes around the outside of a wrist. Don Bluth characters, you'll see, for the most part, they'll just be a block. The arm in there, and then the arms, it's a real simple language for hands. You know, just real squared off shapes. You wouldn't do, you know, a realistic hand with metatarsals and parts coming off of that and drawing all those shapes. You would actually just draw this stylized version of a hand. So that is a Don Bluth style. And if you, I'll do another one with the face. And if you do Don Bluth style, then you're copying these parameters. And so, like I said, I copied Don Bluth a lot, but I don't stick to that. I don't do it exactly like that. I've kind of modified it for my own purposes. Another thing is Don Bluth faces. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. So if I split this in half, and then button for a nose, and then these sharp, and one of the reasons he did it this way is because Milt Kahl did it this way, but another reason was because it was easier to have something to hang stuff off of. So as long as you've got these straight edges, then you don't have to worry about when it comes to in-betweens, or when it comes to somebody following you up, you don't have to worry too much about whether or not they're doing a good job of it. As far as organic shapes, you know they are, because they've got points that they can follow. So this is actually, it's been a while I haven't done this, but this is kind of a cross between Dirk the Daring and Ace, I guess. I don't know, but it's the rules of Don Bluth. Always an indication of like the upper lip, and then always everything would be offset, real crooked, to make it more interesting. Even if it doesn't necessarily line up with the contours of the face, it's still, you know, just the mouth is like this free-flowing thing, but it all stems out of the nose. You can draw lines coming off of the nose that sort of capture that, you know, this, I don't know, this is just a Don Bluth-ish character. And there's an example of, that's not Don Bluth, but that's my version of Don Bluth. This is my own style, which comes from, you know, my style comes from Wally Wood and Al Cap, who did Will Abner, characters that are completely forgotten today, and I don't have examples to show right now. But if I was going to do this for myself, I would do it slightly different. I'd have the eyes close together and kind of googly. I don't know what the technical term for that is, but sort of googly. That you can see some of the things that I did keep, and then some things that I didn't. So this 3/4 head, I got that from working at Disney for years and years, or in the Disney style for years and years. But you know, that's how I would do it differently. That's my style. That's my style versus the Don Bluth style. And then if you're going to do a traditional Disney character, you do it another way. And so this style is the synthesis that I've created from years and years of drawing other people's work, and then coming up with my own way of drawing that's unique to me. And that is my own style. And then that style, the way I drew this, is a language. The way I constructed everything is my own language that have basically developed and honed over the years. So anyway, so that's a really long-winded answer to a great question, but that's my take on the concept, at least. All right, so now we've got this scene of a dog walking across. It'll take another pass before it gets up to speed, but that way you can look at it a little better. So it's still, I still don't have shadows. That's a whole technical thing you can do in Toon Boom, lay down shadows based on your actual animation. I just haven't done it yet. I might add tones and highlights to this because it's pretty simple. It's just a one, I think it's 12, 14, maybe 20 frames of a walk cycle that I'm repeating over and over again. I'll show you how that works in a moment. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that's helpful. Drawn Skull. Thanks. So to break this down, this is currently, it's just been looped. So I'll just turn off all the extra layers. We'll turn off this layer. I'm going to turn off the line, and we'll just start from the beginning. The first thing that I did was, and that you should always do, is you should gather reference. And see if this is my actual reference or not. Yeah, there you go. So I just went and found reference of a dog walking across the screen, and then I captured the part that I needed, which was just this part. That's cool. You can always watch recordings of this, by the way. So the actual length of this is 26 frames of just the walk itself, the rough walk. The whole thing is 110 frames, but we won't deal with that for a while yet. So this was the reference that I chose. I just downloaded some reference from YouTube. I split it into individual frames using basic software. You can use After Effects or MPEG Stream Clip. I use QuickTime 6, which is a nightmare to try and get it, but once you have it, it's a really great tool. It allows you to edit and change ratios, and it's discontinued and it's not set up for PCs, but you can do it. I'm living proof. I've been using it for a long time. Anyway, so I turned it into an image sequence, and then either in After Effects or in Toon Boom, I justified each frame so that the character was walking in place. I did that by creating those lines that you see on the screen, so the dog stays within the parameters of that area, and then also by going in here and making sure that I've locked the feet to a specific place. So this is locked up. Let me just unlock it so you can see what I'm talking about. So this foot is what I use to key everything off of. So if you just look at this foot, you'll see on the next frame, I placed the drawing so that it's sliding at the same pace. And then that's going to keep it so it looks like it's moving in place when actually the dog was moving forward. When you do a dog walk, you're probably going to do it walking in place first, and then you're going to have it move forward after. And so in the animation world, you can key things off of the feet. In this case, I reversed engineered it so it looks like it's walking in place. And then for my final dog walk, I made it walk forward, and I'll show you how that was done. But anyway, it's just a matter of getting proper reference. So I wanted a mid-sized dog that's moving at a mid-sized pace, and then looked at this, analyzed it, tried to find what I could use from it as far as reference goes. What does the tail look like? What does the head look like? What is it doing as it walks? The important thing to remember about a cycle is that it has to be doing the exact same thing over and over and over again. There can be no aberrations. And at this time, it's probably a good idea to point out a great resource for doing this sort of thing, which is Richard Williams' walk cycles that he laid out. So if you look at the Richard Williams book, which you can find this online, you can just find this particular pattern. If you just look up dog walk Richard Williams, you can see that he's laid it all out, and he's laid it all out for 2D. And so here you can see the way that it's set up. So It's a matter of which parts are going up and down, which parts are hitting the ground, which parts are moving, and which parts aren't. And by looking at that, and by looking at the reference, you get a good idea of what you're looking for in your reference as far as keys go. And so when I was looking at my reference for the dog that I chose, I wanted to make sure that everything was there. I'll hide this for a minute, but I'll bring it back. So I started with the front legs being in their stride pose. What is a stride pose? Well, that just means, I'm going to change this color. That just means that how far away are the legs from each other. They are set a specific length, and that's going to set the amount of stride that I have. And I just got this from the reference. So when I went ahead and drew this, I used the front legs as a guide. And you could either use Richard Williams, which, bring that up again, you can see the stride pose is the number 3 pose in from the left. He used the back legs for his stride pose when he did it. So you can see the first drawing on the left, the blue leg is forward and the non-colored leg is backwards, and they're both on the ground. So that was his stride. But I used the stride in the front legs to start with. It's just made it easier for me because I figured, the legs in the front are the ones that are kind of guiding the body, and then the ones in the back are going to follow along. So based on that, I know that the first frame and the last frame have to be exactly the same. Now, when you're dealing with a live animal, or when you're dealing with people, if you use this, if you're trying to do a walk cycle using a human being, people don't actually move exactly the same. They will have all sorts of, well, hey, Mr. Jay, I know who you are. Welcome. People, we were just talking about this actually. When you do a walk cycle, it's imperative that you have to have your first frame and your last frame exactly the same. In your reference, they're not going to be exactly the same. They're going to be slightly off. You just have to kind of guess, oh, is this my first frame and my last frame? And then know that when you draw it, they have to be exactly the same. In fact, I may have included something closer to the last frame here, because I think I changed the timing of this. So yeah, so there's my actual last frame on the reference that I chose. So there's one, there's the last one. You can see that the first frame and the last frame, they're pretty dang close, but the head's different, the tail's different, the back legs are different. And from there, you have to kind of calculate, well, what is the length of my walk cycle? And that's why I have it set to this frame, because that ended up being the length, or actually this one ended up being the length of my walk cycle. But it started with going, okay, first frame, last frame. There's my first frame, there's my last frame, and those front legs at least should look exactly the same. And somewhere in the middle, let's see where it was in here, somewhere in the middle you're going to have the same exact thing except reversed. So we'll say that one was frame 13. Now, not too easy to tell because it's a dog and it's black. Probably could have chosen a lighter color dog or lightened up the contrast in the reference, and it might have made it easier. But the important thing is note, in fact, I'm just going to designate these as keys so I can just flip through them more quickly. Number 13 and this one. So now I can just flip between the keys. And you'll see that it almost looks like they aren't moving. It looks like the legs are in the same exact place each time. But if you look really close, you can see that from here to here, the legs are switching places. That this leg is down on the ground in the foreground. That there's actually some perspective there. And then on the next one, they switched. And now that foot is here. And it's the same pose, but they're in a different position. So you can see the difference between these two. They've switched. It's kind of hard to see because the dog's black. But that is my first pose, and then I mirror it on my last frame. My first pose, and then a complete duplicate of that on my last frame, and then a mirror pose that's the same, except mirrored. It's the same except reversing. So if the right leg was forward, then the left leg is forward. It's helpful when you're doing this to draw in different colors. So you can draw one leg in blue and one leg in red, and then that will make it easier to see as well. Then, if we Oh, sorry, I'm hiding this whole thing with Richard Williams. So this is what I was looking at. So I was looking at this leg was back, and then this leg was forward. But you can see in perspective, you can see which one is which. But when you just look at the black dog, it just looks like a silhouette. And that's the way it should be. They should be exactly the same, except switched legs. So going on and on about this for too long because it's important. You really have to understand the process that everything on frame 1 should match frame 13 exactly, and frame 26 in this case exactly, except that frame 13, the middle one, is a mirror of the first one. It's everything. If the right leg was forward, then the left leg is forward. All right, I think I've. And again, I don't want to bore you. This isn't. I don't want to make too much of a lesson out of this for anyone who happens to be stopping by. But just wanted to make sure that you get the basics of it. So then I would go back to Richard Williams and I'd look at it and go, okay, well I have some options. Do I want to do next the passing position, or do I want to do a contact position, or do I want to do something in between? The highest position of the leg where it's a post. So you have that option, but you only have to do it for half of it. So I only have to worry about from this frame to this frame, from 1 to, in this case, 13, because I'm going to mirror everything after that. From 13 to 26, everything is going to be a mirror of the first half of the scene. You're doing a complete stride here, and then a complete stride here, and that's a total walk cycle. And I'll draw that out in a minute, make it easier to see once the dog is gone and I'm doing lighter drawings. But so from here to here is all I have to worry about, and then from 1 to 13 is the only thing I have to worry about, and from 13 to 26 I'll just have to mirror those original poses. But within that, then you break it down further. So here is a passing pose, which, what luck, it ends up being about halfway through the scene. Between 1 and 13 there's a halfway point in where the dog is in a halfway pose, which is this one. So for the purposes of making a point out of this, I'll just key it so you can see that later. And then I find the same thing on the other side of my reference, which is here. Now, theoretically, these are supposed to be exactly the same amount of frames apart. I've already gone ahead and done that on the next pass, and I'll show you that. But right now I'm just blocking it and looking for frames that look the same. So right now it looks like this one and this one are roughly the same, close enough. And then after that, it's just a matter of finding the ones in between that make this action happen. So for example, contact pose, the position where the dog's leg was when it made contact with the ground for the first time. I'll make that one into a breakdown so that we can designate that as being different, and then go through all these and look at them. So that's a breakdown where the contact happened on the front legs, only the front legs. And then I'll do the same thing with the second half of the scene. So here it looks like right about here somewhere is where the contact was. I'll just say it's that one. And then I compare the two and go, yeah, about as close as can be. But remember, they're not exactly the same. They're switching legs. Remember that this one, if this one is the left front and this one's the right front, then they switch. And now this one is the right front. It's pretty vague, isn't it? And then this one is the left front. So you just want to keep that. Oh, this looks like an L. So you just want to keep, oh, great. So you just want to keep that straight. Do that again. Right. Well, actually, that's not a bad way to do it. Right, and then left. And then if I flip between those two, you can see they switch left and right, left and right. And then if I go through all of them, you can see that I filled in some of the action. And if I were to play this and just play those frames, you can see that already it's starting to look like a walk cycle, but I'm looking only at the front legs. I'm not dealing too much with the back legs just yet. So then I can go through in my reference and I can find the next pose, which is going to be, you could either be the pickup point, so somewhere between this front pose and then this one, which is the crossover. Somewhere in between there, there's like a pickup point. You're going to do all these poses eventually, but for the time being, you can just go, okay, well, I'm going to do that one next. And so then, same thing, I just have to find that pose on the other side of my timeline. And then just check them and make sure that they look pretty close to the same. And then keep doing that. Same thing on here. I'm going to find a pose that looks like an extreme. That looks pretty good. And then find that same pose on the other side of my pass. So right here. Now again, you may notice that these numbers aren't going to line up when I do this. When I look at it like this, it looks like the right timing. But if I were to animate this with this timing right now, it would look sloppy. It wouldn't look right. It wouldn't look real, and it wouldn't look good. And that's because we need it to be even. So that on the next pass, you'll see that I've done all this already, and it's even. But once you've done that, it's like, okay, I've got the legs working. And if you look at, again, I'm not showing you this. If you've got the legs working, just on keys and breakdowns in the front, then you can also now place, well, when is the body up and when is the body down, just for the front of the body. So when is just the front half of the body up and when is it down? And then you can use Richard Williams to kind of go, okay, well, I know on this pose it's supposed to be up, and then on this pose it's supposed to be down, only for the front. He's gone through and he's marked all that stuff for you, so you can use his drawings as a guide. Then, once you're happy with that, then it's a matter of going and doing the same thing for the back legs. So with the back legs, same thing. There's a stride pose. In this case, it's right here. Well, fortunately, the stride pose matches the front stride pose. So that part, it was easy enough. So the first frame and the last frame are, roughly the same there. But you have to go through and designate this stuff and then try to fit it into the key scheme that you've already got best you can. And it just takes practice. It takes time and practice and thought, and it's a mathematical exercise. Because then, once you've done that, then you're going to go out and sketch it out and make little thumbnail sketches that, let's see if I can do this. And what I did, basically, I cheated. And you can do this too if you want to. But I created a simplified version of this, and I tried to match it with the dog reference that I had. And then based on what I discovered from doing that process, I was able to come up with this test. So I'm going to turn off the reference and just play this for you. And so I came up with, turn it off, come on. Then I come up with this. So this is based on the reference that I had. Let me get rid of that last frame so it won't flash anymore. So go back to here, so go to frame 25. And now you can see that this is basically based on my thumbnails and based on the reference, and then mathematically making sure that everything was going at approximately the same speed, which I'll explain in a sec. I came up with this, which is like a rough pass. I could have just scribbled this out, but instead I decided to do it using vector shapes and plot some of the key joints and some of the key thing. All of this stuff I got from the reference. If you go back and you look at the reference again, you can see that that's what the reference looked like. But the reference was imperfect. It didn't look, oh, that imperfect world that we live in, right? It didn't look as clean as I'm going to need it to be for a cycle, because remember, a cycle has to be clean. You can't have things that are popping or doing funny things, or it's going to show in your animation and it's going to look really jarring. And so in order to make this nice and clean, I had to come up with a scheme for the timing of it that was even. And I think even at this point, I think I was just matching what was there with the original reference. But eventually I went through and I made some decisions and made sure that everything was lined up. And if the feet are on the ground in one place perfectly, then they're on the ground in the other place perfectly. So let's just test that theory and see how I did. So here's frame 1, and here's my last frame. They should be exactly the same. So 1 and 25, they're exactly the same. A little bit of a divot with the fetlock, or I call it the fetlock, but the dog's lower foot. This is a little off, but that's fine. And then the one in the middle should be a perfect mirror copy of that. So it's exactly the same, but it's mirrored. So there you go. So there's a mirror copy of frame 1. You can tell because the blue and red, if you've got a color monitor, which everybody should have, they're they're switch places. So the blue and the red have now changed places. The head and the tail, theoretically, they should be exactly the same on one and in the mirror frame, but you'll see that I changed the position of the tail slightly because the haunches are moving back and forth as the dog is walking. The left and the right side of the hindquarters are changed a little bit, and so I worked that into my scene so that it allows for that when I animated the rough. So now I'm going to play it without frame 26. Well, actually, yeah, so I'm going to play it on just a frame 24, so without the copy frame. And so we'll see if how smooth that looks. So it's looking pretty smooth. Some of these things, you know, I worked them out in advance because I knew I was going to do it. I did this for a tutorial, so there were some things that I just added. I wouldn't add the tail just yet. I wouldn't add the ears just yet. I might not even add the head. It's enough to just kind of block out the legs and the arms. And so it's okay to focus on that. In fact, it's okay to focus on the front legs first and just get the rhythm of that down. And then go back to your reference, go back to your thumbnail sketches that you made from the reference and plot it out and make sure that in some rough form, whether you just scribbled it in or whether you did like I did and used vectors, in some form, it's you can look at it and go, okay, yeah, that's working. And then from that point on, you can start roughing it out even more. Or if you scribbled it out the first time, you can start working on rough pass. And so my rough pass looked like this. So this is what my rough pass looked like, and I'll just play this. You can see it playing at speed. And the thing about this is, you know, in some ways it's like, oh, well, you cheated. You know, you just leaped right into this. I would not draw this cleanly on a rough pass for my animation personally. For my rough pass, I would probably scribble it in a lot more. In fact, I think I'll do that right now just to show you the level that you can expect to draw. But again, I was doing this for a lesson, so I had to do it quick, and I wanted to make sure it was nice and clean. But so if I'm going to draw on this pass, let's unlock it and draw at the level that I probably would. So for those legs, I'd probably make a circle for the body. Let's change it back to black. And draw in here. And start drawing. Take my word for it, I would just draw it a lot more roughly. That's the only thing you really need to take away from this is I would not draw it to the cleanliness of this because I ended up having to change all this stuff anyway, so it was kind of wasteful to draw that when I was going to go back and change it all. But like I said, I was doing this for a class, so I drew it a little bit more cleanly. But once you've done some form of rough pass, then you get to work things out. So, I mean, it's still technically rough. It's just not as rough as it would be if I did it right. So if I go through this a little slowly, you'll see some of my drawings. You'll see that they're not that nice. There's a lot of stuff with anatomy. Look at the leg in the back. It doesn't look quite right. And there are all sorts of things that that I would do differently. The eraser's working. No, maybe the pencil's working finally. No, it isn't. Whatever. There are things that I would do differently if I was you know, doing a cleaner version of this, but because I wasn't worried about it being clean, I could just draw sloppily. And I always encourage people to do that. And I can't stress it enough that when you're doing rough animation, you need to draw stuff really sloppily. So in the case like this, it probably would plot, I wouldn't try to draw just that area. I would look at the back leg and I'd do what I know about animal anatomy, which is, well, let's do the front leg, it's easier. So that there's this relationship, so that's going to stay the same. And then it's going to connect between the two. And then there's going to be a foot at the end of it. And then based on that, I can kind of fill in the details and stuff that I know about anatomy. But look, it's the wrong thickness. It doesn't have the style of the lean dog that I had. But I'm just, taking a guess at it and just drawing really loose. But it still has the general information. It's in this angle, with this setup, and it is a dog leg. It's not a horse leg, which would be a lot longer, and the horse leg would be on stilts and have a really pronounced fetlock that comes down here and separates it, and then building all that up on top of it, and then going back. So it's not a horse leg, it's not a cat leg, it's not an elephant. It's following the rules of the dog that I set out to use as reference. And the interesting thing too is that I sometimes forget to mention is you want to draw your dog a lot. Whatever style you want to draw in, you want to draw it a lot before you even get to this point, so you know exactly what kind of dog you are attempting to draw. Just something to consider. I point this out often when I'm talking to animation students, that if you don't love to draw, 2D is probably not for you. If you don't love to draw but you love motion graphics, you might want to try getting into CG animation, where you can concentrate on the motion itself but not so much on the aesthetic aspects of the drawings. Just something to think about when you're deciding, well, I really like to do animation, but I'm not sure if I have the chops to draw. And well, there's still room for you. There's still room for everybody who's got a passion for this stuff. Another thing, well, what if I don't like to draw and I don't like to work on a computer? Well, maybe you want to try doing some stop motion work, but you can still get into motion graphics in one way or another. Anyway, so I would draw this really sloppily. I've erased most of the construction lines and things that I used, again, because I was doing this for a class. But even looking at my rough pass, you can see it's still pretty rough. It's still not, I'm not worried about how much character I'm going to put on. It doesn't have a face. It doesn't have any color separations or anything like that. I mean, the whole thing didn't, but the color's not been separated out. I did do a lot of copying and pasting, and that was a clue at that point to, well, how can I copy and paste a lot when I go to do the cleanup pass, which is time consuming and really long and requires a lot of thought. But I was thinking about all that stuff. It's like, oh, how can I work this out in a way that's going to be easy to clean up? But you can see there are a lot of little hitches and things from an in-betweening standpoint that wouldn't pass muster. It's still a rough pass. All right, so once I worked out all those yayas, then it was time to go in and start talking about the line version, the cleanup version. So go to frame 1, and I created the cleanup version based on the work that I had already been doing with the character. So before I even sat down to start animating this thing, I got to know the character really well and decided to come up with something that might look a little bit 101 Dalmatians-ish. There it is. I think it's already moving. I don't think I have a version of this that's walking in place, unfortunately, in this scene. I'm not going to waste time opening up another one. So you'll see it moving forward, but there's also something to be said about keeping something walking in place as long as you possibly can, so that you can work on the cycle itself and then making it walk forward later by just adjusting your drawings, which is exactly what I did here. But you can see I did this kind of Disney-ish, Dalmatians-ish style. Speaking of style, so I was going for something that's actually, this probably looks a little bit more like the first animated film I worked on, which was called Rubber Dangerfield. And there was a character I worked on, I think it was called Daisy. It was the romance uh, character. The character that Rover Dangerfield was in love with was named Daisy, and she looked kind of like this. I drew it about 2,500 times, and so I have a tendency to draw characters that look that way, especially dogs, because that's what I drew so many of. Anyway, so I started with that with the face, and then I decided not to go for a black color because I thought that would be too hard to read, and then followed the style of the body for the original character of the dog that I use as reference. And so I completed the cycle. I painstakingly went frame by frame, a lot of cutting and pasting with this one, but you can see some divots and things in the in-betweens where it's a little bit different. But I in-betweened it in place so that the character was walking in place and made sure that everything was all lined up and everything looked nice there. And then I went and adjusted each one of the drawings, as I was talking about at the beginning, and did a reverse engineer to it so that I could make it look like it was walking in place. And then once I did that, I got my handy dandy background out that I had prepared in advance because I'd done a animation layout. And based on that, I had the character walking across the ground by copying and pasting the cycle over and over and over again. So if you look in my timeline, you can see that this just copies and pastes. So you see these stair steps where here the walk cycle was on this layer. I'll just highlight that. And then I copied and pasted an entire instance of the walk on another layer, and then adjusted the drawing so that they're moved over. I'll show you that visually in a minute. And then did the same thing here with these drawings. And then did the same thing here, and just kept that going for as long as I wanted the scene to be. In this case, the scene goes for 120 frames, I believe, 122, something like that. So based on that, I just kept repeating it over and over and over again. And then you could eventually group it, which I'll do in a moment. But that's a way to make it so that your cycle goes over and over and over. These are all turned off, so I'll turn them on and leave them on. So my last frame was 120. So I'll set it for 120, and now it's just going to cycle through that again and again. So now if I play it, you can see that the dog walks forward, and that I did that by having a cycle that I had created of the dog walking in place, and then matching the first foot to the last foot of the cycle, which I'll show you, and then adjusting things from there. But basically I adjusted the first walk, made sure that that looked nice, and then all I had to do was copy and paste it, and it would walk over and over and over again as many times as I copied and pasted it. But because of the placement of the foot, then it was now giving the illusion of things walking forward instead of just a copy and paste job. So let's find where this cycle starts over again. It's right about here. So this frame was the last frame of the walk, and then the next frame of the copy and pasted walk is here. So all I had to do was grab all of my frames, just marquee select everything, and then as a unit move them into the specific place that they needed to be. And in this case, the place that they needed to be was designated by matching. Remember when if you happen to have caught what I was talking about at the beginning, remember when I said at the beginning that there was the stride here? Let's do better than that. The stride of the legs was here. So in order to keep that going, I just have to make sure that the stride stays that way. So that means on the next frame, the stride is going to be the same because I did the walk cycle right. Now I just have to key it off of one of the feet. Well, which foot should I key it off of? Well, you should key it off of the foot that's resting on the ground and is going to carry the weight of the entire body. So when I copied and pasted this foot, I copied and pasted this foot so that it was on top of the one that had happened just before it. And I basically did that by using onion skinning. You can't see it now, but it's a little harder to see now. And it's not exact. It doesn't have to be exact. In this case, it doesn't anyway. Sometimes it has to be more exact, but I just made sure that the 2 feet lined up so it looked like it was taking over for the last position it was in. And by doing that, I was able to create this situation where it looks as if the first foot of the copy of the cycle is picking up where the first foot of the last cycle left off, which sounds a lot more complicated than it is. It's one of these things that you'll find it by trial and error. If you try to do this yourself, you'll go, oh, well, I think that the only way to do that is to make sure that that foot is locked in place, which it isn't locked perfectly. And there's a little bit of sliding, but it's not so much that anybody would notice. And if I put the shadows in here, which I may eventually, I'm not going to do it today, but if I put shadows in here, then eventually you would see how it works just fine. It looks like the character's foot is locked in place on the front legs and the back legs. Looks like I might actually have a little deviation frame here that needs to be fixed in the back legs, but don't worry about that. But it might be helpful to play this with onion skin on. That's always looks kind of cool. Get just a few extra frames on both sides so you can really see where the thing came from and where it started and where it ended. So let's play that through. Now you can't play. We'll just do it by scrubbing through the seam. So there you go. You can kind of see the flow, and that's another way to check your work and make sure that the character is walking across the scene properly. Is to turn on onion skinning and check it out that way. So turn onion skin off and make sure that everything else is on so that you can see the whole scene. So there it goes. And again, I could just copy and paste this and have this walking forever and ever and ever. It will just keep going until it runs out of frames. And as long as you keep copying and pasting, then you will have a character that walks on and on and on. But that's the basics of how I would get a character to walk on in a cycle first, and then how I would get the character to walk forward. And then, like I said, to do the shadows, I just would take those frames and then basically do another copy of this and lay it on its side in 3D space, and then blur it a little bit so that you could see the character on the ground, but blurred out or maybe recolored so it's dark. And then in 3D space, so it's actually physically laying on the sidewalk in 3 dimensions. At least it gives the illusion of that. Another thing that you could also do is you could create another layer, and I have my students do this all the time. It's just fast and it's easy, and the results aren't bad, and there's some creativity to it. But you'd only have to do this the once, and then you could copy and paste this just like you did before, which is, let's just pick a frame, any frame, and then draw a shadow, and then lower the opacity of the shadow. In this case, I'd probably want to amp up the brush size a little bit to draw a nice painterly line with a nice soft pencil. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now because I don't want to spend time on that. Let's make this really chunky and thick. How about this size right here? And set it nice and big, and then just, you know, draw something underneath there. There we go, something like that. And then I can go into that layer and I can knock it down using layer properties. So just have to look for the advanced and turn down the opacity just as far as you want it to. So try 34. See that? So that's a nice soft shadow. And then once I'm happy with that, I can go in and I could draw the rest of them. And if you want it to be a nice shimmery shadow, you could, you know, just draw it. And so every time the character moves forwards, it's going to shimmer a little bit, and that gives the organic quality to it. Or if I wanted to, if I like that one, then I could just copy and paste it using the cutter tool. And just copy, and you can either use hotkeys, Control-C, Control-V, just like with Adobe stuff, or you can go the long way around like this, and then paste it. And then it's just a matter of moving the object itself. It's just an object like any other. And so I could move it forward slightly like that. And that way you get a more, you get a shadow that's got a lot more consistency, but you lose the organic quality that you get when you do something like that, when you're doing it straight ahead, basically. So you can see here that it's shimmering a little bit, it's changing, and you won't be able to keep it consistent if you just draw on every single frame. And so if you want it to be consistent on every single frame, then you can just copy and paste it. Or you could do a combination. But this is a really fast, down and dirty way to just add some shadows. I'm not gonna, no, I'll just do a couple more frames of this just for laughs, and see what happens when I just draw this out straight ahead. I can be pretty sure that it's, well, this thing's on 2s for a lot of it, so I don't want to draw an extra frame on there, but I can be pretty sure it's going to look really shimmery, and it probably won't look that good, but at least then I can say I told you so. On the other hand, it may look wonderful, and then I'll still say I told you so. So anyway, so those are, I'm just drawing some shadows, and then I'll play these real fast and we'll see how they look. While I'm doing that, if anybody's out there, as always, if you're out there and you have any questions or thoughts about anything I've talked about so far, or again, if you want to talk about something completely different, the floor is yours. Please, please feel free to jump right in. And the only caveat is you have to be nice, and don't use foul language, and don't be naughty, or we will end up inviting you to leave this session. So, but if you have anything, just go ahead and write it in the chat window, and feel free to ask away, and I'm always happy to talk about stuff. A lot of things people talk about, I want to talk about, or how do you get into the industry, that sort of thing. You're more than welcome to talk about that stuff. I'm always happy to share things, but yeah, it's up to you. Whatever you guys want to discuss, if not quadruped walks. So here what I did is I just dragged the drawing layer underneath the character itself. So a shadow would go behind the character, and so I dragged it in like so. I'm going to leave this playing for just a moment because I believe I'm neglecting some of my Twitch friends. Sorry, I'm neglecting some of my friends on YouTube, I believe. So I'm going to let this play and then do something. So please enjoy watching this walk cycle, even though you've probably seen it already, as I go in and set something real quick. So just be right back. Enjoy the wonderful music and enjoy the wonderful conversation of any of your friends on Twitch or on YouTube or any of the places that we currently are in, as I reset this thing real fast. And hope you guys are having a wonderful evening right now, or afternoon, or day, wherever you happen to be at the moment. While I'm looking for this, I will say that the main thing that people like to ask me when they're talking about animation is, you know, can I get a job in animation? And how could I get a job in animation if I study something like this? If I go to a school like CG Spectrum and I study, what are my odds that I'm going to be able to get a job in the business? And the truth is, there's not any one solid answer. There's no one size fits all answer that will help allay your fears that, oh, am I going to get a job if I complete a course in a school, any school. There's no one solid way to get into the business. There's no one definition of what success is. You have to take the good with the bad, and really And when it comes to animation, what we always urge people to do is love the process itself of animation, love it, and understand that even if you're not getting paid to do it at the moment, you're still doing what you love to do, and you're still honing your craft and getting better. And then one day when you do get an opportunity, there's a possibility that you'll be being paid to do what you love, and then you get to win at everything. So don't be discouraged if people tell you, oh, well, right now they're not really hiring, or right now you need to make sure that you're doing everything in Toon Boom, or everything in TV Paint, or the only jobs available are in Netflix, or the only place that you can work is Disney. Take that under consideration, like you take everything, take it with a grain of salt, but understand that you have options. You've always got options, and you always have different ways to get into whatever it is that you want to do. Different manners of success, different things that qualify as being success. So don't freak out if everything isn't turning out exactly like you thought it would. When you sat down and you said, oh, I think I'm just going to take these classes and I'm going to end up being somebody who's working at Disney. It just doesn't always work out that way. So yes, so have a heart if things aren't going the way that they are. All right, so I think that I'm now able to talk to people on some of the other platforms. So if you were on YouTube and I didn't speak back to you, I'm sorry I wasn't able to. In fact, I'm just going to go and do a test message right now and see if anybody can see that. All right, so now that I've talked about the walk cycle a little bit with the dog, if there are no other questions, I'm actually probably going to jump into another scene that I was working on last week and go back to talking about this monster that I was working on in the jump that I was doing before. But if at any time you have any questions about quadruped walk cycles, the main thing that I wanted to stress is just that you're dealing with two walk cycles, the front legs and the back legs, and each one of them have their own system that you have to manage. And so and then once you're done with the front legs and the back legs, you have to worry about, well, is the head offset, is the tail offset properly, are the ears offset? And then, as if that's not enough, eventually once you're done with a walk cycle like this, it isn't enough just to have a dog walking forward. Well, then you have to consider, well, does the dog have character, and is it moving and then doing things as it moves? And now would be a time when I'd go, oh, well, I want the character's head to turn and look. Well, I've already animated the cycle, and so I can now build, I've got enough frames that I can actually build the turning and look on another layer and then incorporate that into my animation. So if it doesn't sound like it's particularly easy, that's because it isn't. And what's funny is I often tell my students that the likelihood that they're going to be doing a walk cycle for their job is kind of slim and none. They're not necessarily going to be hired to do walk cycles. So should you put that on your reel? Should I have a character on my reel that's doing just a general walk cycle? That's up to you. If you don't have a lot of stuff for your reel, then you're probably going to want to put anything that you can. And that is definitely one of the things that I put on my reel when I was just getting started. I was like, well, I can definitely do walk cycles. And at one point, they actually wanted me to be the walk cycle captain for feature films in CG. And that's about the time I said, yeah, I think I'd rather not. I'd rather do something else. But if you think about it, then a walk cycle is actually just a technical exercise. And so some people find it actually easier than having to go in and do something where you've got character and animation and acting. Some people may find it's actually easier to just do something that's a technical exercise, and maybe you want to be a walk cycle captain, which is fine. But for my purposes, I was like, yeah, I think I've learned everything I needed to learn from this, and I think I'm going to move on. So, all right, now I've loaded up another scene, which is a monster scene that I've been working on over the past couple weeks, and doing a cleanup pass on this thing right now, and can talk a little bit more about the cleanup process, and I can also talk about animation process in general as I go and start working on this scene, which I'll just play it in case anybody happens to be watching and wants to check it out. So this is what the scene looks like. Well, I'll turn off the cleanup layer. This is what the scene looks like so far from the monster Santa point of view, from the monster standpoint, from the monster's point of view. And this is just the monster. I'll show you the hero that goes with it, which is done, at least until I decide that I want to change something and do something else with it. So here's the hero that goes with the scene. It will go a little slow at first and then get loaded up. And then I've got a background that goes with it too. I just turn it off when I'm working on the animation. So you can see the characters in a background, which is just a temp background. I just grabbed it from the net, and then I'm going to make my own eventually. And then the character is having a little fight. So what was the inspiration for this monster? Thank you, Renato. I appreciate that question. The inspiration for this monster was Space Ace. Space Ace had these really kind of gooey looking, funny slug-like monsters that are very cartoony but still threatening. That's one thing. And then the other thing is it's drawn in a style that is mine. So this look where it's almost sad looking, where it's got wide eyes and it's almost sad, that's just a look that I've been doing ever since I was probably 6 years old. I can't quite, I think I got it from the Yellow Submarine actually. There's a Frankenstein's monster scene in the Yellow Submarine with the Beatles, and it has no pupils, and it's got this kind of sad / angry look on its face, and I've been drawing it ever since. And that goes back to what I was saying about style, about how things that you are watching when you're a child, they can come back to you and become a part of what your specific style is later in life. So that is one of the things that I do. I'm glad that you love the When I'm 64 sequence. It's one of my favorites as well. But yes. Yeah, that's basically what the inspiration for it came from. But now I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn off some things and then turn other things on and continue on with cleaning up this monster character and talking a little bit about that as I go as well. I think I'll leave the hero character on. It's fun to sort of see the two of them interacting together. And ultimately, this character has to mesh with that character as well. So at a certain point, when I was roughing out the animation, I made sure that they worked together and didn't overlap or do anything that I was going to have to fix later. But now what I'm doing is I'm adding a nice tight cleanup line on top of this monster, and I have preferences that I like for it. I like to draw with a pretty thin pencil line. So we'll see what it's set at right now. It's set at 20 by default. I can find out how big I was doing the cleanup line before by looking at my old drawings. And then just draw right next to it and go, oh, okay, is that the same size? Nope, that's way too big. Usually I like to draw between 6 and 10 for a maximum size. So I'll draw that one and see if it... So in this case I did 10 because the creature's a little bit thicker. And then depending on what the character is, I'll either do a heavy black line or I'll do a lighter brown line. For the character, the hero character, I actually used a brown line, so it made the character a little bit softer. So you can see if I zoom in close on the character, you can see that the pencil line itself is brown, which is unfortunate because it doesn't really go well with blue, but it's just traditionally that's how they would do it in Disney shorts, Disney feature animation, and 2D features. They would try to soften the line, short of going in there and actually doing a different color for every single element, which is, if you've got money and time, that's the best way to do it. But short of that, I was just drawing a brown line, and then I would, whenever the character's face showed, I was drawing his eyes in black. Let's see if we got a frame of that. So if you zoom in really, really close, you can see that his mask and his hairline and his ears and everything, those are brown, and then his eye lines are all black. And that was just so it would pop. I mean, the mask around his eyes was also designed to make it so his eyes would pop out, and the color light blue like that. That too was a way of making sure that everything popped out. But sometimes if you use a brown outline color, then you'll find that your drawings disappear. They disappear into the color, and it doesn't look very bold. So for this monster, I'm just going to go ahead and go real bold and make it a black line. And if I want to knock it down later, I can always do that too. In Toon Boom, I can just change the color of all the lines automatically. So I'm just going to start in now and start drawing the face. I don't have to be too precious about the face, because either I can draw it freehand because it's moving so fast, I can just trace over what I've got there, or I can take information that I've got from other drawings. So for example, this one maybe looks a little bit like the one I'm going to do. Maybe this one looks a little bit like the one I'm going to do next. Certainly I can take things like the teeth and just stretch them out. So I'll probably take this drawing and copy and paste it using the cutter tool, and take elements of that, and so just copy and paste, Control V, V is in vector, and then Control V, V is in boy, and it didn't do it. So do it again. So Control V, Control C to copy it, and then Control V, and now I can just place this over the top of the other one and go, well, how close is it, and how much can I make it look close if I just squash and stretch some things? So now I'll go in here and do some surgery. I can get rid of my timeline so I have more real estate, and then squash and stretch this, or draw parts of it, erase parts of it, draw parts of it, and so I can poach stuff from drawing one, so it's going to stay consistent, but yet keep the essence of what happened in this drawing, which is a lot of squishing going on. We could probably, and then for something like this, I like to up the smoothing, the smoothness. It can mess with your drawing sometimes. It can mess with your session. It can make your session heavier if you mess around too much with the smoothing. But for something like this with big broad swatches of line, I like to keep it very smooth, because then I don't get a lot of shaking from my hand. Drawing on glass, basically, which is what my Cintiq tablet is like. So now I can stretch this out and get it to match the squishiness of the rough drawing that I did. And I drew really rough on purpose for this very reason, so that I can go back and match things a little bit better with shapes that I've already drawn later. It just saves me a little bit of work. So now I'll compare this one to frame one, see if I've got it right, or if I need to adjust a little bit. But it should look pretty close to frame one. Just squished, just stretched and pulled. It looks like I probably pulled it a little bit too far. It's going to look too big, and so I'm probably not going to be able to poach a lot of this. Probably better if I just draw the teeth in, or these teeth are just going to look way too big. But I did get some stuff. I think I should be able to use the middle teeth. And now with those teeth gone, I'll readjust the angle. get it a little closer back to what I had in the first place. But it's just a wonderful thing to be able to copy and paste drawings from other frames so that you don't have to draw the same thing over and over and over again, which is how we had to do it in 2D in the olden days. In the real world, where we were drawing on paper, there was no way to do this other than you could use a Xerox machine. You can copy and paste things on a Xerox machine, and that was a nice way to get things to be copied like this. And then you can distort things with the Xerox machine. There was a whole art to it. Some people got really good at it, but nothing compares to the ability to go in and do this stuff digitally. And it may seem like it takes a long time because I'm doing this live and I'm yammering away while I do it. To do it by yourself, you can really knock this stuff out quickly, much more quickly than if you try to draw it by hand on paper. I'm just going to go on record as saying that. I get into some trouble sometimes because I have friends who, I don't want to say trouble, but I have friends who are very down on the digital world and they don't like talking too much about digital animation. And I'm sorry about that because, as you can see, that's the way that the world has gone, and there's a lot to love about digital animation in all its forms. And I've never believed that it was a case of one or the other. There's always room for hybridizing things. And so I feel it's unfortunate that some people I know just don't want to talk about digital stuff at all. They don't want to go into the digital realm at all. They want everything to stay exactly the same as it was, and that's too bad. It's an unfortunate feeling, but I also get it. I get that you get to a certain point where you're good at something, and you've mastered it or become a master at it, and then somebody tells you, "Oh, well, we don't do that anymore. That's over," and you're sort of faced with this. Well, what am I supposed to do now then? I don't want to learn that new program when I was happy with the one I had. I have been dealing lately with QuickTime 6, and I've talked a lot about it with some of my students where I was very comfortable with QuickTime 6, which is probably from 2011, or maybe it's earlier than that. They stopped it in 2011, but it does everything, and I was used to it. I mean, you can change film ratios within there, like take a movie that you've already got, rendered, and in QuickTime Pro version 6, you can go in there and you can reshape the ratio. You can make it squeeze for 16:9, or unsqueeze it if you need to in there. It's just amazing what this thing could do right before they discontinued it. And when I was looking at research for whether or not you could put that on a PC, because I had never used it on a PC before recently, and I was looking for whether or not you could do that, I found all sorts of people who were like, yeah, I can't live without it. I absolutely love this thing, and I don't see why they don't stop supporting it and why they want you to move on to other stuff. And they always say, well, you don't need it anymore to work on in the PC world. There are all these other options. Well, then I got into some programs that said, oh, you can't do this because you don't have QuickTime installed. And suddenly I needed it, and VLC wouldn't do it, nothing. And none of the programs I've gotten used to working with could do it. And so I went back to digging up QuickTime, and lo and behold, I found a way to install it once again on my PC, QuickTime 6, the Pro version, and now I've got all that functionality back. Now, having said that, I'm still looking for new programs that are better and more current and will do that kind of stuff, and I'll be the first one to jump on the wagon because I don't want to be stuck with that thing. But in the meantime, it does everything that I needed it to do, and even though it's not supported, it works like a dream. It creates .movie files, which I think that's a thing of the past. I think now everything's H.264 MP4, which is better, and I like it better, and I'm totally about that. I suggest everybody gets behind that one or whatever's coming next, whatever the next rendering style is going to be. But at the same time, it's like I got a lot of old stuff, and it's great to have that stuff supported still, so I can still go in and use .movie files. I can still edit them. I can still make new ones. Whatever I got to do with it, whatever reason I need to keep it. It's nice to know that I still have it available and that I'm not left in the dark. So the point of that was all to say that you do have to update and you have to change. You have to roll with the changes. But I also understand people who are like, yeah, but if the old thing works, why do I have to go try something new? And just because it's shiny and new and probably costs a lot of money to get on board with or something like that. I get it. I know people who are still using Photoshop from years ago and it still works for them. And they're still able to do the things that they want to do with it. More power to them. But I'm also a big proponent of, you know what, that ship has sailed and it's time for you to move on and get into doing something else. I am so glad, Simon, that you said that in the chat. I was starting to feel like maybe I'm sounding too much like an old fogey talking about it, but I mean, I heard it from PC people who are current CD people who are like, wow, I've got all this old stuff and I've got a functionality to it that I like, and they basically just put us over a barrel by not supporting, well, oh gosh, Mac product that's no longer supported and you have to get something new. You know, there's a big shock. Yeah, it became a very standard tool and I got used to using it, and just the freedom that I have when I use that silly thing, even though it's very basic and very low rent, but there's so much freedom to it that I have to you know, that and there are so many programs that still use it that I'm glad I actually can still use it for however long it lasts. Simon, if you are out there and if you're listening to this, in my OBS, I am logged out of the chat window. It happened right before this all started, and so I'm not getting everybody's chat. I'm only getting in Twitch, and then I'm going onto YouTube and checking out. If for some reason you happen to know what the password is for that, or how you can find it, if there's a standard one that we were all using at CG Spectrum, if you could send that to me, that would be awesome. If there isn't one, or if it's personal to me and I just lost it, I don't know. I can limp on the way it is, but for some reason I was logged out of the chat window right before we started, and I have no idea how to get back into it, and so I can see everybody's chats all across all the platforms. So one of these things we'll figure out I'll figure out one of these days, probably in another 6 to 8 months, when I finally got this figured out. Awesome, thank you. So I'm looking at something. I mean, I have the window, but it's just asking me for an email login and a password. I can try entering that. I'm not sure what will happen, but it's asking me. I didn't remember setting up a password, so, I think I'll probably just leave this one for next time. I don't think there are a lot of people out there who are wanting to chat right now anyway, so it's working out fine. But in case anybody out there has put out a chat specifically on Facebook, I'm probably ignoring you, and I didn't mean to. Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Simon. I appreciate you hanging in there and offering what help you could provide. It's always that fun feeling of being live and just like, yeah, now what? So, but I'm able to obviously see some chats anyway. And other than that too, it's like, well, then I'll just ignore everybody and I'll just go off on a tangent and just start talking about my childhood. I'm sure everybody's interested in that. But yeah, we were just talking about outmoded technologies, and there have been a lot of them where things went away, and for the most part I've been a really good sport and I've adapted, and I've been very happy because things just get better and better, and I've been really thrilled with every new step that I've taken with video cards and sound cards and updates to latest versions of software. But every now and then, everybody knows that you get to that one version and you wish you could roll back and go back to a one that was working like a dream, humming along, and they tell you that they don't want you to do that. Or you've got a software program lined up and they say, well, we're not going to support that anymore because we want you to buy the latest version. So so those things happen. But again, it's like, well, how people are going to make a buck? You have to be able to make some cash off of the things that you've worked lovingly. I always feel bad for people who create free rig characters in CG and put them out there, and then we all, I include myself, we all take them and don't necessarily do anything in return. And it's like, well, it is a free rig that was part of the arrangement. So I'm very understanding to people who set up a program and want you to pay for that, and then want you to keep paying at some point, to keep upgrading it or doing other things so that commerce continues. Where there's some of us who are like, well, no, I'm still happy with Photoshop from 2005 or whenever you last paid for it or stole it from somebody. And that's not fair. That's not good commerce. But as long as everybody's being cool to each other in some way and not asking you to completely start over from scratch, which happens sometimes with, I'm not going to name who, but we all know who it is. Some companies want you to just ditch everything and start over from scratch every couple of years, or 2 to 4 years. And that's not economically feasible for a lot of students. Aha. Cool. I'm going to now try something just for laughs. Bear with me here. I knew I should have written this all down. Of course I didn't, because I thought I would just remember it. Or I thought it would never break. And so just bear with me here. How about if I just play this again just for fun? There, and you can see how it looks, because you haven't seen it enough. All right. But thank you so much for setting that up for me, Simon. I really, really can't say thanks enough for having my back here. So I am currently logging in and loading in. Wow, look at all these wonderful things that people have been saying that I've been missing. So very sorry about this. All right. Okay. And these are probably comments for game and design. So I've got that to work with. All right. So anyway, that is the character that I've been working on, as I've been showing you for the past few moments. And now I'm going to go back to the one that I was drawing. But yeah, once again, thank you so much, Simon. I really appreciate your help in this. And nice. Cool. But in the meantime, I do think Blender will replace Maya as the 3D standard. Wow, that's a really good question. That is an excellent question, and thank you too for pointing out that my graph was covering up the drawings. Yeah, so is Blender going to replace Maya as the 3D standard? Well, who knows? I'm hearing more and more from Maya every day. Simon, maybe you can even chime in on this one if you're tapped into that conversation. I hear more and more people saying, well, we can do it in Blender. Why can't we do it in Maya? Can't we do this and that in Maya? And it's like, yeah, why can't you do that in Maya? And my feeling is, without selling out Maya, because it's been very good to me, I've appreciated it all these years, but my feeling is that Maya has been an industry standard for a very long time, unchallenged. And at a certain point, somebody somewhere has got to step up to the plate, right? And give them a run for their money, and it'll only make it better as long as there's no monopoly situation, which is unfortunately what happens with big companies a lot. Then it's only going to make Maya better, and then it'll make Blender better, because they're going to want to keep competing. You know, it's each one of them is going to step up to the plate and go, oh, well, you can do that, and then guess who benefits? It's us, the people who use those programs. So there are just so many wonderful things that Blender can do that are right out of the box. To be honest, I don't use it myself, but I know people who do use it, and I've watched people use it, and I've looked at tutorials and things, and have been very excited about the things that it can do, and the things that it's going to be able to do sooner than later that it isn't doing yet, but you can see what's on the horizon. And so I don't know that it's going to take over, because I think Maya's got a pretty strong hold on the business right now, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if they corner another end of the market, or find that one specific thing that only Blender can do that Maya doesn't do yet. And as a result of that, Maya suddenly goes, oh, wait a minute, wait, that's not fair. We thought we had a corner in the market. Now what are we going to do? We have to get it back. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. So that's my firm answer to the question, without trying to play sides too much, because like I said, I'm on the consumer side, and we benefit when there's healthy competition between companies. And like I said, as much as I love Maya, and I've been with it from the beginning, or whatever that was, I'm also cognizant of the fact that you have to stay relevant to the needs of people that are using the product. And sometimes I feel like Maya isn't the most intuitive program in the world, and that they could maybe step it up their game a little bit and make it easier for people who've never done Maya. Here I'm talking about Maya on a 2D platform, but it's relevant. It's all tied together. Everything is connected in some way or another, all this stuff. And so I think that Maya is needlessly complicated in some ways, mostly just because it does so much and there's so many different ways to do it. But I think that some people I have been talking to, they would tell you that it's complicated for a reason. They want to make sure that it isn't easy for just anybody to do it, so that people who are in the biz maintain their stronghold. And if it's easy and everybody does it, then it's not worth anything anymore. So it's hard for the students to switch because of in-house tools. Yeah, absolutely. And once there's a significant benefit of Blender, the switch may happen quickly, like Substance Painter overtaking Photoshop. So there you go. That's a great answer from somebody who knows what they're talking about. It's hard right now, but let's talk 5-10 years in the near future. What's going to happen then, when it isn't harder? And I know that at Rhythm and Hues we worked with proprietary software called Voodoo, which was definitely a step up from Maya, because it had all these proprietary tools. For example, my favorite one was a world control that you could then push a button, and then all the information on the world control would be set to your center of gravity control, which is CG animation stuff. But anybody who's worked in CG animation knows there's a difference between the world control and the COG. Usually don't animate the world, and wouldn't it be nice if you could, and then have all that information transferred over to the COG? It's not hard. I've had students do it in other classes. I mean, when I say it's not hard for people who are wired for programming, who can do stuff like that. But it is, it's something that has to be set up, and it's something that has to be thought about, and it's specific sometimes to specific character designs. But anyway, the point is Rhythm and Hues had this proprietary software that they'd set up, and it was called Voodoo, and it was based on Maya, but because they didn't want to buy Maya, they just, back when you had to, it was really a thing, they just said, well, we'll just take Maya and we'll make our own version of it. And did, and then they started adapting it and using it for specific things that you couldn't even do with Maya. And up until, as far as I know, they're still using it. Last time I talked to anybody who worked there, and it was great. It was the first time, Maya now has the ability to do caching, so you can play stuff in real time. They had that in Voodoo back in 2006, which means they probably had it before then. That's when I was working with them. And Emo, which was the precursor to Primo, which is DreamWorks, what they use, that had the ability to cache in real time, but they used low-res versions of characters. And so it was a little bit different than what Maya does now, but it was the same thing. So Maya was like, oh gosh, we got to get that because people can do that in other programs. We need to be able to do that too. So that's a thing. Let's work on it. Now, right about this time, getting back on track with the topic of 2D animation, I had somebody say to me that they were having a horrible time with their setup, with their computer, and with their pad or something in one of my classes today. And we both laughed and said, funny, paper doesn't disappear when something goes wrong technically. One of the things that would happen with 2D animation was the air conditioning would go out. That was always a bad thing. But we never had to worry about computers going out. We would shoot pencil tests with video cameras, and they would break occasionally. But there were always plenty of them, so they wouldn't all break at the same time. I'm trying to think. I never dealt with computers at all, but we're talking 1996 when I was at Disney. We didn't shoot our own pencil tests. We had people shoot them for us. Wow, how shushy was that? Well, that was Disney. They had money, and so they hired people specifically to shoot pencil tests for you. When we got to DreamWorks, we shot our own pencil tests, and we would shoot them using a pretty low quality video camera, but we had dozens of them. And then we used a computer system, and we'd have to log stuff in and make sure that you were logged in as a specific user for that. So that's a little bit closer to what we have now. And the grousing, the complaining people did when they realized they'd have to log into a computer to shoot a pencil test themselves. And couldn't we have someone else do that? Or wasn't there an easier way to do it? And it was just the clunkiest thing I've ever dealt with. It was, at the time, which was 97 to probably about 2002, that was, it was clunky for its day. I can't imagine what it was like now. It wasn't slow, it was just clunky. And the video was very digitized, very pixelated. But we weren't looking for details necessarily. We were looking for whether or not the motion was working. And so as long as the motion looked fine, we knew we were going to go and clean it up later. But it worked off of, oh boy, this is going way back. It worked off of darks and lights. So it would almost sometimes it would look like a negative image, but you'd still be able to see whether or not it was working. Funny, haven't thought about that in years. It had a name to it, some silly name, but I don't remember what it was. Someday I'll talk to somebody who's working at DreamWorks and we'll have a good laugh about, hey, remember that thing, that system that we had? What was that thing called? Couldn't remember if you paid me right now. But yeah, computers became a part of our life in very early on. And it was, I've told this story thousands of times, but it was one of these things where you just had to look around and realize that either I start getting with the program with computers or I'm going to lose my career, lose my job for sure, but lose my career. And nobody wants to do that. And so, even back then there were people who were complaining because we had to use a computer to do something as simple as shooting pencil tests. And then once people learned it, they didn't have a problem with that anymore. But yeah, the switch over from 2D animation to CG animation was really brutal. And I've talked about that a lot. But if you want me to talk about some more, just give me a prompt. But there are other more positive and fun things to talk about than the death of 2D animation. A sort of sad footnote in history. Like I said, by the time it happened, I had already transferred to CG. I was excited. It was something new and different to do. And so there were some people who considered me the enemy from that point on. But again, try to stop progress. And at that point, I didn't really want to. It was exciting. It was fun to learn new things. In the same way, it was exciting when somebody finally said to me, hey, you know, if you get a good Cintiq and you have the right animation software, you can do 2D again. And in fact, you can do it better than we ever did it before in some ways, because we've got all these great tools that help you to draw perfect lines and help you to visualize your work before you can spend money filming it, and then there's no film. So you don't have to spend money filming things anymore. I like to tell about one of my favorite films that got me into animation was this old film called Wizards by Ralph Bakshi. It's very rude. It was supposed to be his first family film, so my parents dropped me and my brother off to see it. And instantly you're greeted with a voluptuous princess fairy who's not wearing very many clothing, wearing very much clothes, and a cynical wizard who curses. And it starts out, it's a pretty interesting little film to this day, I think, but it gets lost eventually. Anyway, I started out being interested in Ralph Bakshi stuff, and I was surprised to learn that he didn't do pencil tests on Wizards. There was no pencil testing of animation. It was whatever you drew and you flipped it and you looked at it. That's what we're going to shoot, and that's going to be in the movie. And now when I look at the film, I can really see it, and I can see how much pencil testing would have improved the look of the film. At the time, I didn't know what any of that was, and I didn't care. And I still think the parts of it look good. I've been told, well, I didn't talk to anybody about this, I read it, that if Bakshi says if any of the movie looks good, it's because of John Sperry, who I was fortunate to meet towards the end of his career and subsequently his life. And he worked for 60s cartoon studios. I think he worked for Chuck Jones. He worked for everybody, which is what you would have done in the 60s because there wasn't a lot going on. And he was responsible for all the really, really good character stuff that happens in Wizards, if there is any. And he would tell me little tips and tricks about how he did it and how things went and what the production was like. And he had nothing but good stuff to say about Ralph Bakshi. Some people have told really, really rude stories about what he was like, and as a very irascible person from the East Coast who called him as he saw him. And I'm not going to go on and on about that, but that's probably one of the reasons that he was able to make the movies he did, was because he had a strong personality and was willing to fight for the stuff that he was interested in, which was making cartoons his way. And he's the one, I've said this before, I'll probably say it many more times before I'm done, but he was the one who would always say, just go out there and just get it, just make your own movie. And some people think that's what's wrong with his films, is he didn't take the time to do it right. You look at something like Don Bluth I was talking about earlier, the work that went into Secret of Nim. That film is way beyond the budget of the crew that he had to make it, and that's because people really wanted to do it right. They spent the time to make it a work of art and lovingly went through and worked hard on it. With Wizards, he just needed to get it. He just wanted to make it happen. And he had made other films and they'd been very scrappy like Wizards was, and it worked. And so it worked. And as long as it worked and the film was a reasonably successful film, then why mess with success? When it came time to Lord of the Rings, the Ralph Bakshi version of that film, he was way out of his element, way beyond a budget that he needed to make a film like that. So if you've ever seen it, if you even remember it existed, it ends with this title card or voiceover, I think it says. And so ends the first story of the Lord of the Rings, and we'll be back with the sequel that finishes off the story later. And of course, there never was a sequel, and they never did finish it. And I know people to this day who are like, "Oh, I wish they would finish that version of it." We got Peter Jackson's take on it. But boy, I sure wish he would have finished the cartoon, because I thought it was great. And then we have other people who say it's junk. Yeah, I did think junk's a really harsh word, because Peter Jackson certainly copped parts of it when he was making his version of Lord of the Rings. If you watch the sequence with the Dark Rider and the Frodo and his three friends hiding, and Frodo's contemplating putting the ring on, watch that one next. You can see all this stuff online, but watch that like YouTube. You'll see comparisons. Watch the version that Jackson shot compared to the way that Bakshi lensed it in 1977 or 76, whenever he made it, and you'll see they're remarkably simple. They're similar, and Jackson acknowledges it. He says, "Yeah, I thought that Bakshi did a valiant attempt to kind of visualize Lord of the Rings, and it made it easier for him to visualize it when it was his turn to see that Bakshi had already done it and had a starting point. Plus, also, they were also using the same influences in some ways. Alan Lee was a famous painter in the 70s who visualized Lord of the Rings stuff, and Bakshi used him, and Mike Plug, and there was some crossover anyway, just the way that they looked. But he just did it. I mean, he did it however he could. Bakshi, he just got it, and he was able to make a film, and it played, and a lot of people really like it. And I have mixed feelings about it. I like it, but I'm kind of over it. I can't get past some of the flaws. About halfway through the film, when he ran out of money, it just all becomes rotoscope, not rotoscope, but actually taking live action drawings and photographing them with Kodak paper and then painting them, and then that's your animation. It's like, even as a kid, I'm like, ooh, that's a cheat. That's not animation. It doesn't even look as good as Wizards did. So about halfway through the film, when it's just battle scenes, I get real bored. I have to watch something else. But you got a great dialogue cast. Here I am pitching Ralph Bakshi's Wizards. You got the guy who plays Legolas is C-3PO from Star Wars, Anthony Daniels. So that was kind of, I mean, it doesn't sound like him, so what difference does it make? But it's just fun that he was in it. And some other cool voice actors. And one last pitch for Lord of the Rings: if you liked the movie and you always felt sad that they never finished it, the BBC did a radio version, an audio drama of the entire Lord of the Rings, using some of the vocal cast like Gollum and others who were the voices in the movie. So it's almost like we got a sequel that finished off the story. Anyway, so there's enough about Lord of the Rings already, but in lieu of anything more exciting to talk about, I can certainly share my geek knowledge of 70s animation films. Just for the record, one more thing about that. When I was working on The Swan Princess, I worked with some people who had worked on Lord of the Rings, and I was really excited about that. And I used to make my own animation cells, and one of the animators, Crystal, who worked on Frodo a lot, she signed it for me. She signed one of my animation cells from one of the key moments in the film. Now, don't tell the Bakshi company or anybody related to them that, because they're currently trying to sell animation cells of those things online, and I support it. I would get one if I couldn't make them myself, or if I wasn't. I'm out of that era of buying things like that, and after working in the business enough years, I'm sort of like, no, it's enough for me to just know it exists and see the film. But it was awfully exciting when I was getting my start in the business to have somebody from a film that influenced me a lot sign a copy of artwork that I had reproduced from the movie. I thought that was pretty cool. And then to have John Sperry, who had worked for Bakshi, and get to talk to him in a very casual way about his successes and failures in the business. And then one of the big influences on my career and who helped me get my start when I worked at his studio with Dale Bear. He left Disney to go work at Bakshi's company because he was so impressed with Wizards. So when I heard that when I was, I don't know, in my early 20s, and I met Dale when I started a studio, I was like, oh, I found my home. These people speak my language. They know what I'm interested in, and I worked on the things that I was in love with when I was a kid. So the bigger picture to that is anybody can have that happen. I'm living proof that you can meet your heroes. I've met most of my heroes in one way or another, and you can meet them, you can work with them, you can, I used to work with the voice of Space Ace, Jeff Etter. He's still out there working, and they had told me, they said, well, yeah, Space Ace, he works here. I don't know, I asked somebody, I said, oh, did you know that the voice of Space Ace, he actually works at this company? I was so excited, and then I wasn't sure, you know, what he looked like or who he was or how he was, if he was available, you know, so I could geek out because I was in my early 20s. And somebody said, yeah, you know, he works at the studio, but you'll see him, you'll meet him eventually. And I'm sitting there working, and I hear this person talking in the next room, and I was like, that Space Ace, I mean, he really talks like that. It wasn't a put on voice. He actually really talks like that. And I got to talk to him, and he loved it. He loved that I was a fan, and told me all sorts of crazy stories. He told me how exciting it was to go into an arcade in a mall and to hear himself coming out of this video game. And I thought that was pretty cool. And then Dexter, the voice of Dexter, for anybody who's got, if you don't know this, go and type in Space Ace right now on YouTube, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The voice of Dexter was done by Will Finn, who I was peripherally all around. He's an old animation legend. Not old, but I mean, he's another one of these people I worked with who was an animation legend, at least as far as I know. I mean, most people think he's done a lot of really cool stuff. But anyway, I worked with him. He was a director of Hammy's Big Adventure, which was a short film we did at the end of Over the Hedge. And he directed it. And that was his clue. You know, I didn't want to geek out or anything, but finally I could because I was working directly for him, and he was cool, obviously. And so I said, listen, I just got to ask you this. Were you really the voice of Dexter in Space Ace? And without missing a beat, he just goes, I'll save you, Kimmy. And he said it exactly like the character. And I thought that was pretty amazing. It was a total geek moment. And then he also did some other characters in the video game. And so he had lots and lots of fun when we'd meet for dailies or director's notes or whatever. It was a real informal show, a lot of fun to work on, mostly because of him and the other animators on the show. But he would do voices for me because he knew I was a geek and he knew I loved it. And we'd all laugh and ha ha ha, he's doing Dexter. And I thought that was really fun. And then the voice, everybody wants to know, you know, who did the voices of the voluptuous female characters, because a lot of people are in love with those female characters, and just leave it there. But as far as I know, Vera Lamfer was the voice of Princess Daphne, and she was the head of cleanup at Disney, and still is. If they ever do another Disney 2D film, I'm sure she would do it again, if she wanted to. And then oh boy, no, I can't remember her name, but one of the co-directors on Spirit Stallion of the Silmarillion, the horse film that we worked on DreamWorks, that was, she did the voice of Kimberly, as far as I know. You can quote me on it, you can look it up, it's out there online. You can look these things up if you're really that big of a geek. I was once, and she never did any of the voices. I never felt comfortable asking her. I talked to her and she directed us, and you know, we'd meet when she'd look at my work and things. But no way was I going to ask her. She was a really, really cool person, treated me very well, but I just didn't know if she would be comfortable. I don't know if that's something that she was proud of or something she didn't like to talk about, but it just never came up in the course of making that film. But Will was all over it. Will Finn, he was more than happy to, and Jeff Eder, they were more than happy to talk in the voices of those characters and tell me stories. And that was very, very fun. I've told the story about how I got to at Disney not meet, but we got to be in the same room with a group with the voices of Alice in Wonderland, from Cinderella, from Alice in Wonderland and Cinderella. And on that note, I'm going to stop because I have to now say goodnight for the evening. This is a little bit different evening. We'll have some technical stuff set up next time. So if you come back, I will have a few more things for next week prepared, and some specific items to show that'll be all sparkly. And I'll have some of the, oh, see, there we go. You guys can now see my chat window. So now I'll have some of the technical issues worked out, but I'll have plenty more stories about the business or any old thing that you're interested in talking about. But we have now reached the end of another session, a live stream session, and hope you've enjoyed hearing some of these stories. And like I said, always come back, ask questions. I'll be happy to talk about anything you like. I do 2D animation, CG animation, both creature effects and character effects, or I have done them, and have a lot of experience doing both of those at various studios. But that's for next time. Till then, have a great week. It's been wonderful being here again, and look forward to more fun next time. And take care. See you next time.